Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. With the threat of reservations looming over the private sector, is Indian industry doing enough to help the weaker sections? And can it convince the government that affirmative action is the right way of tackling the problem? Those are the critical issues that I shall raise today in an exclusive interview with the Vice President of CII, Airtel's Sunil Mittal. Mr. Mittal, let's start with what the Prime Minister said last month at the CII conference. I urge industry to seriously consider enhancing the educational and employment opportunities for weaker sections in an affirmative manner. And then he also said, commit yourself voluntarily to making your employee profile more broad-based and representative. Do you interpret that as a call for voluntary quotas or affirmative action?
Well, I would say it's not a quota. I mean, there was never a mention about slice and dice your company into quotas. But yes, he came out very clearly, industry needs to do something.
So newspaper interpretations, as for instance those of the Times of India, which claim that the Prime Minister was asking for voluntary quotas, you think they're mistaken?
It's really, how you put it. Voluntary quota, they are oxymoron, you cannot have a voluntary and a quota. So I think everybody picked up the message, the Prime Minister wants to do something, there's been a political pressure of quotas, so it got to, I think, sort of kind of synced into it.
Now the Prime Minister also used the phrase weaker sections. Does that in your interpretation include OBCs, or is it restricted to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes?
Well, this is a debate which rages on. From our point of view, weaker sections are all those who are economically backward. I would take them as all those people who are underprivileged today.
That includes then the OBCs?
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody?
Yes.
The UPA's Common Minimum Program says the UPA government is very sensitive to the issue of affirmative action, including reservations in the private sector. Do you believe the government might change the constitution to bring in reservations, or do you think that's unlikely?
It's my belief that it's unlikely that there will be a major legislation around this. Industry needs to strengthen the government's hands. Industry needs to show some action, needs to do something. I think government will fall short of going through a legislation.
So your belief is that the government may talk about reservations, but it won't actually go around to amending the constitution to implement them?
I believe so. I would tend to believe that the government has the good of the nation at heart, and there's not much good going to come out of a legislation.
If the government were to surprise you and actually implement reservations, how would CII react?
I think it may be wrong for me on this forum to take a position on behalf of CII, but I would say if there is a law that needs to be followed.
But would you consider going to court as Rahul Bajaj, who has twice been president of CII in the past, said should be the case?
Well, I would say anything that is going to hurt the industry's competitiveness will have to be fought. At what forum, which place, courts or outside courts or politically will need to be dealt with. And until the time that will not be turned away or reversed, I think we'll have to follow the orders.
So your stress is that anything that's bad for industry has to be fought?
Oh yes, absolutely.
All right. That's how you view the government's position. Let's now turn to industry's position itself. In a recent lecture at Cornell University, Ratan Tata said, industry has a responsibility to the 60% of India's population that is not industrialized and is living in rural areas. He added that industry cannot create wealth without making an effort to spread the wealth. Do you agree with him?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a strong believer that if India has to get its complete benefit of its large population, big market, if we will not carry those weaker sections of the society, if we will not aggregate the eastern part of India into the mainstream, I think India will never get its glory, never its due weight in the world polity.
So this is a duty and a moral commitment that industry has?
I believe so. It must have. Whether all of us have it, it will be hard for me to say. But I would believe that this is something industry must have it right in front of their agenda.
Now, Ratan Tata in that lecture also said that if young Indians cannot find a place in the sun, and those were his exact words almost, if they can't aspire to the dreams that they see on television, India, he added, could see the makings of a revolution. In other words, he said, this wasn't just a question of social justice, it had to do with the future and the integrity of India. Do you accept that?
Yes, to a large measure, yes, because there are now 630 million people in the working age. All of them don't have equal opportunities. Over 55% of India is below 25 years of age. This India is growing up. They are watching, as Mr. Tata said, televisions. They are seeing items of conspicuous consumption. They have dreams, they have aspirations. And if they will not be met, if there will be no revolution, I think it will be generally creating a tension in the society, which is not good for India.
So this is a question to do with the very future and integrity of India.
I believe so.
It's not a minor matter.
Oh, it is not. Indeed not.
All right. It's quite clear from what you're saying that industry has a commitment, industry has a duty. The question arises, to what extent has industry already fulfilled its commitment, and to what extent does it need to take specific measures hereafter to do so? Companies like Ashok Leyland, Hindustan Lever claim that already 55% of their working force is OBC, SC and ST. Do you see those companies as unique, or may there be many, many more companies just like them?
Well, first of all, these examples that you have given just now clearly demonstrate that there is no active discrimination. People are not going and actively discriminating in the marketplace. The fact is, there are certain areas in the country, we go to the northeast, you go to the eastern part of India, you clearly see that large amount of people from the backward section of the society, underprivileged, are being hired. And that's not because you go and actively look for them. The supply is much larger. You come to places like Delhi, Mumbai, it's much lower. Service industry, white collar, much lower. Go to deep manufacturing, much higher. So companies like Levers and Bajaj and many others actually have very high percentages of people from ST, SC and even OBC.
And you're also suggesting that companies like Lever, Bajaj and Ashok Leyland are in fact not unique. There are many more companies like them that have perhaps 50–55% of their workforce from these three castes.
I believe so. I would believe so. If the industry was to take a roll call, I think everybody will be surprised. The question is, should we take that roll call? We believe it should not be taken.
All right, but that's on a matter of principle. But were the roll call to be taken, in practice, everyone would be surprised.
I believe so.
Now, your president, Mr. Sheshasai, speaking to the Financial Express, and the whole thing has been reproduced on the CIA website on the 24th of April, says that, in fact, in manufacturing industry, perhaps up to 35% of the workforce comes from backward classes. And he added that in the services industry, the percentage would be considerably greater. Does that mean that already industry is doing a lot to fulfill its commitment?
I think what I can confirm is that the accusation by some segments that the industry actively discriminates does not hold ground at all. There is no question when you hire anybody, you ask where you come from, and therefore you don't hire people who are from that segment of the society. The issue is the people coming from that segment of the society are not skillful, do not have the skill sets or the wherewithal to have the full opportunity available to them.
I'll pursue that in a moment's time with you, but your first answer was that industry doesn't discriminate. Does that mean that industry is the victim of a false impression?
I would say to a large extent, yes. If you look at the total organized labor in this country, even I was surprised, it's only 8.1 million people. That's it in the organized way. Rest are all through contract labor and temporary workforce.
So when people say that industry discriminates against SC, STs and OBCs, that in a sense is in fact prejudice.
I think it's a criticism which is ill-founded, certainly.
Now in fact the government's own NSSO figures, the latest of which came out in 1999, show that the share in employment of SCs, STs and OBCs is almost exactly proportionate to their share of the population. Do you believe that in a sense this corroborates your point?
Yeah, I'm not aware of this data, but I'm assuming that this is correct. It just corroborates that there is no active discrimination.
And in fact, Surjit Bhalla, writing in Business Standard just about 15 days ago on the 15th of April, quoting from and developing upon the same NSSO figures, showed that even if you look at individual jobs, the share of OBCs in those jobs, whether they're managerial at one end or clerical and agricultural at the other, is again proportionate to their share of the population. And he said that much the same was true of SCs, STs, except at the very top managerial and sales levels. So again, do you think that all these government figures show that industry is doing enough and that there's no need for prejudice about it?
I think what's coming out very clearly from all the data points that you have just mentioned, that industry is doing enough in terms of people it's employing. But does it reaching out beyond what they're doing?
Is reaching out a question of making the point understood by people, or is it that you need to do more? So is it presentation or action?
I think both. And we are all awaiting very keenly the J.J. Irani report, which will come in the next 5, 6, 7 weeks. That will bring the data points, which will actually make the picture much more clearer to the country, The industry is doing enough.
Okay, but in the meantime, referring to the CII figures that in fact your president, Mr. Sheshasai, has been giving and that are on your website, and referring to the NSSO figures that we just discussed a moment ago, what then did the Prime Minister mean when he called upon industry to ensure that its employee profile was more broad-based and representative? Do you get the feeling that perhaps he didn't know the true picture?
No, I would again come from the same point. The Prime Minister has been urging the industry to do more. Activism in this area. Show and demonstrate that we are doing enough.
Except for the fact that the Prime Minister didn't acknowledge the point that Mr. Sheshasai makes, or that the NSSO figures make, that industry already is doing a lot. That acknowledgement wasn't there. He was calling for more without acknowledging what you've already done.
No, I think we have to give due to the Prime Minister. He was very, very clear that there is a large segment which needs openings in the corporate sector. There's a large amount of people out there who are not getting equal opportunities. My dear friends, the government cannot do it alone. That was his message. Please join me. Strengthen my hands in doing this job.
And you, as Vice President of CII and as Chairman and Managing Director of Airtel, have no quarrel either with the content or the manner in which the Prime Minister made his comment?
Absolutely not at all. Personally speaking, I would say that it's a clarion call by the Prime Minister of a country which has been taken in the very, very right spirit. Lots of people in the industry who are generally very strongly opposed to any action from the government side have been quite happy with the Prime Minister's appeal. They're saying we need to do something.
So even though the NSSO figures and your own president believe that industry has done a lot, you believe there is still room to do more?
I believe so, but maybe not in the area of employing people, but in the area of making them employable. I think that's the difference we are making.
All right, let's take a break at that point and let's come back and talk about your plans for affirmative action, which in a sense is how you make people employable. Are they sufficient, or do you need to do more than what you've already proposed? We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to an exclusive interview with the Vice President of CII, Airtel, Sunil Mittal. Mr. Mittal, CII produced last year a document called A Strategy for Affirmative Action by Industry. The document says industry would like to engage in a program of affirmative action for the economically disadvantaged living in India's small towns and rural areas. My question to you is, what exactly does this mean in concrete terms?
Well, what it means is that the industry around the clusters, wherever they are manufacturing or having operations, needs to reach out to the community at large. If you recall, in the last 2 years, the program of adopting ITIs came into play. Industry must adopt ITIs which are languishing, which are not providing the vocational training, and industry has started doing that. So it's a combination.
My point is simple. Is this an indication of intention and goodwill, or is it a determination to take meaningful, concrete action? Which is it, goodwill or real action?
I think everything starts with the goodwill. We have a departure from a very socialistic mindset where industry had to do its job and the government...
But does it go on to action after goodwill?
Oh, absolutely. Goodwill is the first building block for action, and some of the actions have already started.
I accept your point that without goodwill you can't have meaningful action. The problem is sometimes goodwill remains goodwill and action doesn't follow. Let me tell you why many people are doubtful of CII. Your document says that this would be a voluntary code where targets and milestones are set by the companies themselves. The problem is, would a voluntary code be a meaningful code, or would it just be cliches? And would targets that you set yourself be challenging, or would they simply be convenient?
I think it's going to be a mix of both. Some people will just give lip service. If you look at the CSR activities coming out of annual reports, some are really meaningful, chunky, solid stuff, and some are just lip service. So it'll be a mix of both.
You're being incredibly honest. The problem is, what proportion would be just lip service?
I think increasingly it's going to be more action. Today...
Think or hope?
I believe. Because today there's a direct correlation with your market share, with your brand, with your market cap. And those are tangible things.
Let me tell you why people are skeptical. Looking at the document that you produced last year, amongst the things that you said you would do, you itemized giving scholarships, assisting schools, helping with midday meals, setting up mentor groups so that young people could be guided. The problem is, all of that sounds like NGO-style charity rather than concrete action.
Well, you know, thankfully NGO is also becoming concrete. People are now, young people are getting into NGO as a career. MBAs are coming in, MTechs are coming in. There's a big change. So NGOs are no more the old fluffy stuff where you put in a few dollars and hope for something to happen. Concrete work is going on.
But you're talking about NGOs as places to create a career. I'm talking about the nature of advice that NGOs give people. Here, I'm suggesting that what you're proposing to do in the way of affirmative action sounds like charity rather than concrete action.
Well, I mean, I would say, Karan, there's always a thin line between these two. We announced our plans yesterday. We put in 200 crores for opening hundreds of schools.
This is Airtel itself, your personal company.
This is not Airtel. This is the Mittal family, and Airtel will contribute a small little piece as well out of that. This is to open hundreds of schools around the country, hopefully thousands eventually. Now, is this philanthropy? You can say tick mark, it's philanthropy. I think it's an affirmative action. It is really responding to the Prime Minister's call. Thousands of young children who can never get to education, especially girl children, migrant laborers' children, will be educated.
I would acknowledge readily and immediately that what the Mittal Foundation is doing is not just admirable, but it perhaps is even incredible. The problem is, to what extent will CII and Indian industry respond with the same large-heartedness? Let me tell you why I make this doubtful query. Of the 11 proposals last year that CII tabled in this particular document we're talking about, the most concrete was your commitment to set up training centers.
Right.
But what you didn't go on to talk about was guaranteeing jobs thereafter. There was no mention of that whatsoever. What people want is not training, what they want is jobs, but there you were silent.
Let me give you an example there. If you train people, if you educate people, I think you need less to guarantee jobs, because if the economy is not kicking in, you will not be able to give jobs. Bharti School in IIT, set up with a grant of 20 crores from Bharti Foundation, is now churning out dozens of students, going up to 200 students. We were all hoping that we'll be the last resort for the employment, and most of them will come here. And we had given a solemn pledge, you get educated, we'll employ you. Not one is coming to Bharti. They're going to Ericsson, they're going to Nokia, they're going to IBM. They're becoming employable.
So you're training people for your competitors instead, and that's a valuable thing to do. But, you know, I agree with you. The more you train people, the better their chances for jobs. The problem is, you also know this, in India there is a wall of prejudice that is very difficult to break down. A fully qualified SC/ST student has a much more difficult time finding a job than a Brahmin or a Kshatriya student with the same qualifications, and quite often, even in industry, contacts, kinship network, baradari ensure jobs for people who aren't as well qualified, and SC/STs and OBCs simply don't have those baradari and kinship networks to help them.
I have to disagree on this one. Today, when
You sound very reluctant in disagreeing.
No, I'm absolutely in disagreement, because if you go to any one of our canteens around the country, you will not find you will not even know who's who. Senior level people,
How often do you take them beyond the canteen level into management?
There are many of them. There should be many
Enough of them?
I would say there should be many of them. But point is,
Should be.
because I don't take a roll call, I don't even know.
If you were to, what do you think the answer would be?
I think the answer would be pretty good.
I'll tell you at the end of the day why people are skeptical about the voluntary code that CI so far been talking about. Because it is simply voluntary. Not only is it insubstantial in the way that we've discussed, but its voluntary nature means that you can't guarantee every CII member will implement it. Some may not. It's all dependent on trust.
Yeah, but I would say that's the way forward. Otherwise, you are talking about legislation. I mean, there is nothing in between. It's either voluntary through, having role models, through doing some stuff and others following it. Let J.J. Irani report come through. Two things will happen there. One, they will tell you what the industry is doing.
And second?
Two, what industry will do. That will be an action plan which will come out of that committee.
Let me suggest to you a model that has been practiced extremely effectively in South Africa, which could in fact be a way out of the problem in India. South Africa has what's called an Employment Equity Act, which requires all companies which employ more than 50 people, by law and under legal sanction, to implement a series of affirmative action measures. Not quotas, but affirmative action. Could you agree to that?
I would say let's try. Give it 2 years for affirmative action by the industry on a voluntary basis.
And then this could happen.
If we fail, then let the government start
So you're
looking at
saying,
these measures.
try us and test us voluntarily first. If we fail, then convert to something that's legally enforced.
I would say yes. Give us a chance to prove that we mean business.
One of the things that makes the South African law so effective and substantial is that under the law, the phrase suitably qualified isn't just a simple question of formal qualification or work experience. It also includes the capacity to acquire, within a reasonable time, the ability to do the job. In other words, employers have a duty to bring less qualified candidates because of their caste background up to scratch. Can you accept a similar duty and commitment in India?
I will not only accept gladly, we are doing it now.
You personally? Will other people accept it?
I think again it's a matter of how do you want to serve your customers. Let me give you an example, a very interesting one. I've got 10,000 people on roll, that's organized people. I've got 10,000 people off rolls, that is through contract. These are the people who serve my customers. We have decided to bring them into the organized form.
And make them fully on roll.
And they already, every month 800 or 1,000 are coming in. They are all at the low end. And I can tell you, I can hazard a guess here, 50% could be out of this category that we are talking about. 50%, because they're all at the low end. Linesmen, people who go and fix phones, because they need to be trained, they need to serve the customer better.
But the thing is, you're probably an exceptional individual. What I'm really questioning is, will all the other thousands, millions maybe, of entrepreneurs in India accept the same responsibility to find candidates from SC, ST and OBCs and spend effort training them to bring them up to scratch? Do you believe they'll do that?
I think there's no choice.
There's no choice.
Because if the customer wants service and you want somebody from a contract level to serve them, you're going to lose market share.
In other words, this has to be done in the interest of the business.
Absolutely.
Rather than out of charity or goodwill.
I think today the good news is all sorts of CSR activities is also good business.
The South African law goes a little further. It also requires individual companies to prepare annual employment equity plans and to regularly report to the government on their fulfillment. Would you be prepared to go that far?
That is only if you go beyond voluntary. I mean, the point is, if the government says, fine, do it voluntary, but report, that's one action, then you need to report as a part of your annual report, as a part of submission to the government. Other part is that things actually start getting better. Don't you believe, Karan, in the last 2 or 3 years, things have become better? If the economy...
The question is, have they become good enough? And are they becoming better at a rate that's acceptable?
I would say it takes a long time to these benefits to percolate down.
Except that do the poor of India, the disadvantaged, have time on their side?
I think they're getting impatient. They're young. They will not wait for too long.
In other words, industry must move even faster.
I believe so.
So your answer to the government is, give us 2 years to implement affirmative action voluntarily, and we are giving a commitment that we will actually make serious efforts to train and bring people up to scratch so that SC, STs and OBCs are not excluded. But then if we fail, impose the same affirmative action by means of legal sanction.
Well, it's again, I wouldn't say go and hit us with legal sanctions. I'm saying try us out, we will deliver.
But if you have to do it, then do it 2 years later, not now.
Yeah, give us time to perform.
So at the moment, your plea to government is, trust us, give us 2 years, we won't let you down.
Absolutely.
And you're absolutely confident that when you say this, you're speaking for the majority of industrialists in India.
I would say in the last 10, 20 days of this debate, within CI at least, every and anybody that has been on the table for discussion supports this view.
So this is the voice of Indian industry, not just Sunil Mittal.
I would tend to believe so.
Sunil Mittal, a pleasure talking to you on Devil's Advocate.